So I've done a few videos. So on the Trinity X Factor, this is the way you want to position the pliers, and then you want to just turn for the timing. These batch, they're kind of tight. Well, let's go to timing the motor. Now the rotor that is in this is the TEP1150. This is an 11.5 millimeter rotor in diameter, so it's a millimeter less in diameter, so 0.5 in radius compared to what comes stock in the motor. Stock in the motor, you get the TEP1119, which is a 12.5 millimeter rotor. There is a difference in the Gauss. The stock rotor has approximately 1700 Gauss versus this rotor is roughly 1400 Gauss. So you are going to have a difference in Gauss. You also have a difference in diameter, which means that this particular rotor that I'm testing here, because it has a smaller diameter, there will be less rotating inertia, so it's going to rev up a lot faster and a lot easier. Now, the other rotor is going to have more torque, because force times lever arm, right? Longer radius, longer lever arm. It will have more torque, so that's something to consider as well. Now, there is a difference in Gauss because the other one is a larger, stronger magnet. It will take more amperage to turn the motor or rotor to turn it compared to the 11.5. So you are going to notice a few differences. Now, one of the nice things about Trinity, if you look at the timing is always very, very close. You're looking at, it'll be either spot on or there'll be maybe 1 or 2 degrees off between phases. Versus some other motors that I've tested, sometimes they can be 6, 7 degrees in spread, which is a lot in my opinion. So Trinity is definitely, I would say, a high quality motor. Now in my two-wheel drive buggy, I am running a Phantom motor. Maybe I'll consider a Trinity at some point. It's just that Phantom runs great as well. So Phantom is another very good brand that I've come to really like. And Trinity, the reason why I started going Trinity is they've been very reliable motors for me, and then they have a chart with the different rotors and just the options. So one of the things that happens, again, if you haven't seen my other videos, I'm going to mention it again. Some companies will come up with a new version. Let's just say they had the V1, then they come out with a V2, and then a V3, and then a V4, and they change the outside look, maybe make it a little lighter, but advertise it as if it were the latest and the greatest. Usually what they do is, from one iteration to another, it's really the same thing. They just swapped the rotors, which is something that you can do with any motor. You can do that with the X Factor, just swap the rotors. So imagine if Trinity said, this is a 21.5, right, has this rotor. They just didn't tell you what rotor, for example. They do, it's actually etched on the shaft. And then they came out with a new version and called it the X Factor 2. And the only thing they did was swap out a rotor that you could have purchased for your old one. But now you spent $120. Well, this X Factor was about $100 as of this video, but some motors are $120. You bought an entirely new motor when you could have just purchased a rotor for maybe $50. So that's something to consider when you're buying motors. Now, am I saying Trinity is the best of all motors? Not at all. There's a lot of people that really like R1, for example. They like the Tekin motors as well. It's your money. Go ahead and purchase whatever you want. You can purchase several and then determine which one's best for you. It just so happens that Trinity, for me, has been a reliable motor. They run very well, and it's very easy to swap the rotors, and they tell you what rotors they have as an option, and then you can decide based on that, based on the diameter, based on the Gauss, and your application. So, talking about application, why would you run this 1150 rotor? Well, you have a light vehicle, maybe a Tamiya Mini, I have no idea, something really light, under 1,300 grams, or at 1,300 grams, let's say, and maybe low traction. Well, let's go ahead and look at the data table and compare. And here are the differences. So there's a massive difference for this 21.5 when it comes to amp consumption. It is very, very efficient as far as amps. Therefore, the battery is going to last quite a long time. Your voltage is not going to drop as fast within a similar runtime. Hopefully, it just depends on the vehicle that you're running this in. If it's a light vehicle, you're probably going to be fine. If it's a heavier vehicle, well, you may have to gear down, which means it may not make much of a difference. But if we look at the amperage, we're going to look at this 4.2. 4.2 kV is 3,116 versus this 4. We're looking at 2,449. So we're looking at about 3,100. Well, we're just going to call this 2,500. So there's a 600 kV difference, which is a major difference when it comes to kVs. This is the 1150, which is the rotor that I was testing compared to the stock rotor. Now, just for fun, I do like comparing things to the USGT. USGT, we're looking at 1.2, here's a 1.2, so there's a massive difference between that. And the reason why I like comparing it is because I mentioned this before, I think at least one video where I showed up ready to do USGT at a particular track, and nobody was running USGT motors, so everybody was running regular motors with timing, to the moon. They were massively fast. I mean, when you have USGT cars beating 17.5 Sportsman, that's something. And that's the reason why. But even if I compare it to, for example, a Trinity or even this Team Powers, let's see, this Team Powers, what do we have that's similar? 4.2, well, let's go with the 4.4 Advantage Team Powers. But yeah, KV 2,800, it doesn't compare. This rotor is just a lot faster. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is the following. A brand, any brand, so let's just say Trinity or Team Powers for that matter, they're actually on the V4. They will put out new motors and how they're the latest and the greatest. Usually, many of these motor companies, they don't have new technology. I mean, some of them do at some point, but usually the only thing they did is they just swapped the rotors on all of their models. So if you had just kept your old motor and just bought a different rotor, once you figure out what rotor it is that motor has, then you can decide whether you want larger diameter, lower diameter, more Gauss, less Gauss. Then you could actually tune that same exact motor. So instead of spending another $120 on a motor, you would just spend, say, $50 on a rotor. And that is something to consider. Now, Trinity Traxxas, it's just not going to compare. Even the Gauss, it simply does not compare. It's a good, reliable motor for the money. It's very inexpensive, so if you want to start off, maybe do rookie or just bash around and not worry about the motor, then this is good. Or if you run in a lot of sand, this is a good motor because of the can. It's almost all sealed, versus X Factor has a lot of cutouts for cooling. So you're going to get a lot of dirt and sand. So there's also an advantage there. USGT, similar. It's closed housing. You cannot adjust the timing on the motor. There's no timing on the motor, but you could add timing in the ESC. So that is something to consider. You could add boost and then turbo to it. But these are the results. So let me just have this here, and I'm going to compare it just to the stock. But this is close to 2, so we will look at this. So 2,600, 2,300, so 300 kV difference. If we go, well, I don't have anything above this, and the reason why is this is already at 50-degree timing. So if we compared the timing, these two are close enough. kV, almost 2,700, 3,100. There's that 300 kV difference. But the amps, this is going to run cooler, this is going to run hotter, because this is over 5. You generally want to be near 5. So this would be acceptable. This would be fine, especially if you have a fan that's hitting the end bell. It'll be all right. But generally, you want to be around 5. That's generally where motors tend to be the most efficient, make the best power RPM. But that's what we have. So again, at Trinity X Factor TEP1150 rotor. I hope this was useful, or at least informative, or at least entertaining. Please subscribe if you have not, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.
What? Oh, my hair! My tongue! My rod!